Here we are at part two of this last lecture about Herr. And so here I'm talking about technology as a way of war. So this is, to some extent, an expansion of my last point, basically, which is about the American embrace of technology. And no other military has embraced technology the way the Americans have. I think it's fair to say, yeah, except maybe the Israelis. Yep. So the commitment, though, to technology is most visible in some of the weapons that have been taken on here in mass quantities. And this, I cut off my head, apparently. Okay, so some are physical weapons, that is, they're about hurting things or people. Some are about information, some are about both. So the new weapons include things like the helicopters, which I've talked about, and medevac. Never underestimate the force of fast frontline medicine, which we will be discussing shortly when we talk about Linda Van Devanter's and Susan O'Neill's narratives about the nurses at war, because they will see people who have been seriously wounded who are still alive, which is a new thing. I mean, nurses have always seen, in wartime, nurses have always seen soldiers who are seriously wounded, but not this fast. And it's just only going to speed up. By the point we get to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the idea of having a person taken from the battlefield and in a surgical theater within a few hours, I mean, being seen by, say, trauma surgeons who are going to be able to do brain surgery is unprecedented. It's astonishing. I mean, it's just amazing. So, okay. So we have medevac, which is the medical evacuation, frontline medicine, gunships, the Cobra, troop carriers. Okay. Then there are the chemicals. And I talked about napalm. I talked about Agent Orange in regard to in the third lecture about Herr. Agent Orange is matched by Agents Blue and White. They came to be called these not because they're code names particularly, or because the fluids, or like the Agent Orange isn't actually orange. It's just, but because to distinguish these defoliants, they put a stripe on a colored stripe on the barrel. We're talking about a thin stripe of paint. And in the case of Agent Orange, the stripe was orange. So that's how it came to be known as Agent Orange. And in the case of Agents White and Blue, the stripe was white or blue, right? So that's how that happened. Then you got chemicals that you give to people. So this is something which Herr talks about. And they are still doing this. As far as we know, the Air Force won't really talk about it that much, but we know very well that pilots who go out to fly have been given what are called go pills. They were called go pills as of about 15 years ago, when it got into the public eye. Why did it come into the public eye? Because some American pilots killed some Canadians on the ground in Afghanistan. Why did they do that? Because they were hopped up on Benzedrine or some equivalent of speed, basically. So they began to issue, and having military doctors issue medicine basically to use in this way, the military and the medical world have been deeply enmeshed since World War I. So there's a long history there. Let me just put it that way. And remember that the chemical industry is also working like this with the military. So the idea that you would say, well, what do we have for our soldiers? Is like, well, here, give them this. This will keep them awake. So we've got this with, and Herr will talk about this. So Benzedrine at the time was a sort of early form of speed. That's obviously been, by now, people know a lot more about neuroscience and about the brain chemistry and so on. And then there is, at the very end of the war, the so-called McNamara line or McNamara wall, which is an electric fence, basically. It was called Project Practice 9. And what they did was they shot down, from helicopters, they shot down these posts into the ground. I mean, they were javelins, basically. And they would begin to emit a signal. So the idea was that there could be surveillance of this line remotely, and you didn't actually have to have people in the field watching to see whether or not the North Vietnamese were coming. Okay, so these are some of the technologies which have sort of become more stronger in the last. Since then, they've gotten stronger. They've changed, but they've gotten stronger. So Herr is in on it. I mean, he knows. He's onto it. He says, I knew 1/4 Division LRP. Okay, so a LRP is one of these military specialties that would be in the Army, and is a long-range reconnaissance patroller, LRRP. So nobody said long range. Are you a long range reconnaissance patroller? They're like, are you a LRP? LRRP, right? LRP, because that's how it looks, right? So people just call them LRPs, and it became spelled LURP, capital L, lowercase URP. Sometimes you'll see people actually spell it capital L, capital R, capital P. But these people are specialists in the way that their job is to operate usually alone, sometimes with one more person. So there might be 2 LRPs together, and they go out alone into the bush and they patrol. They're there for reconnaissance. They're not there to pick a battle. They're to see where are the troops, where's the enemy, and then come back and report. So going alone into the bush meant you really had to know what you were doing. I mean, if you're going to survive, because you had no support. I mean, you couldn't call an airstrike in or something like that. So you didn't have a platoon of 50 other guys or 60 guys behind you. You had you. And if you got hurt, if you stepped on a punji stake, if you stepped on a stake that went through your foot and was covered with shit, which was very common, and you started to get an infection, which would breed fast in the tropics. I mean, you could be dead in a couple of days, or you got a limb blown off. It's like you weren't going to make it. So they sent very highly trained troops. Often the LRPs had a tour in Vietnam already and then came back. So these guys were, I mean, they oh man, I mean, these, I've never actually met a LRP, not that I know of. I've read about them. I mean, and I just, it's just such a particular military specialty. Another military specialty, which Herr and Dale Ritterbusch talks about in one of his poems, is the tunnel rats. And the tunnel rats actually were a division. No, they weren't a division, but they were a unit, and their job was to, and they had their own patch, and their job was to go into these tunnels. So when they found these tunnel complexes, they would call them tunnel rats, and their job was to go underground with a flashlight and a service revolver. Well, not a revolver; it would have been an automatic, and the Colt 911 automatic, and that's it, and go underground and fight it out. And they did fight it out in these tunnels. So these people didn't survive very long at all. I mean, you had to be wired extremely tight. I mean, the tunnels were full of booby traps. They were full of snakes, just sort of like, because snakes like to like nice empty spaces. Like, oh, good, this is a great place to have a snake family. So, and remember that there are, I think, 52 varieties of snake in Vietnam. 51 of them are poisonous. So the likelihood is that you're, that the moral of the story was kill every snake you see, because you probably weren't going to get the one that wasn't poisonous. So kill them. So very dangerous. And you also have got people underground, and you don't know whether the tunnel is occupied or not. So, okay. Anyway, so discursive. I knew 1/4 Division LRP who took his pills by the fistful, downs from the left pocket in his tiger suit. So he's wearing tiger stripe camouflage, which you see in Go Tell the Spartans. Cowboy and his outfit are all wearing tiger stripe camouflage, which is considered to be non-regulation. And so, as Major Barker says, it helps the men's esprit de corps. And the colonel says, esprit de corps, that's a French word, isn't it? So, we don't want any French things here, right? Because remember what happened to the French. So he's got in the left pocket of his tiger suit, he's got basically downers, things that presumably to bring him back down, and uppers, speed in the right side. One to cut the trail for him, and the other to send him down it. He told me they cooled things out just right for him. This was his third tour. It's on page 5. It is really very hard to know how these individuals actually returned to civilian life if they survived. At the point that you're back for 3 tours, it's probably because you can no longer function in the civilian world. And this is somebody who has what Herr has just called a real war metabolism. That is, he's operating at the pace of war and is going to need war to function. Well, the Lerps were they were so particular that returning to normal is like, what's your new normal? Herr has a particular relationship with the helicopter, and he is one of the best people that writes about the helicopter. The person who writes about the helicopter the best, absolutely, bar none, although Herr is extremely good about it, is Robert Mason, who was a helicopter pilot in 1966 to 67. Flew originally for the first Cav and then moved over to flying slicks, that is, flying troop carriers. And Mason's book, Chicken Hawk, is one of the best war narratives. It's one of the best written books about Vietnam I have ever read. And if you're going to get a sense of what it's like to be in a helicopter, you're going to get it from this book, which is better in many ways at sort of explaining what the helicopter war was, even than a film where you can see, you fly in a helicopter, see that kind of thing. It's like, you've got to read this because it's really something. So I do recommend Chicken Hawk. It's amazing.